Welcome to the second session of the day in the Showcase Theatre at the Immersive Design Symposium. I am really excited to welcome the design team behind the immersive Gunpowder Plot. The Gunpowder Plot is a feature-length immersive experience at the Tower of London, combining 360-degree sets, live performance, virtual reality and ambisonic sound, with a wide range of digital and stage effects. Developed in partnership between layered reality and historic royal palaces, it transports audiences deep into Jacobean London as active participants in the infamous historic conspiracy. I'm so excited to welcome the creative director of the Gunpowder Plot, Hannah Price, and the consulting producer, Tim Powell, and they will be joined for the Q&A by the production designer, Tim McQuillan-Wright. So with that, I will hand over to you guys. Please, can we give them a very warm welcome?
There we are.
Yep.
Thank you very much, everyone. I need this, don't I? There we are. Thank you very much. That's a lovely warm welcome. I'm Tim Powell, so I'm now a freelance producer and consultant in the kind of immersive world. Originally, I was working in-house for historic royal palaces, where I kind of set up the partnership that delivered this show. But then COVID happened, so I delivered it as a freelancer for them. Hence the slightly weird title of consulting producer. But now kind of work full time as a freelancer in that world.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a theatre director. I also direct a lot of game performance and 360 experiences within games and cinematic, stuff like that. I was creative director for layered reality on this, but I'm a freelance creative director. And alongside a really, really amazing team who we can't really give enough credit for, we all created the Gunpowder Plot.
And Tim will be joining us for the Q&A. So we're hoping to talk for about 30 minutes and then do 30 minutes questions with you all. So yeah, today we'll just introduce the experience, talk a little bit about the timeline for making it, the challenges we faced, and the specific focus we've been asked to look on is the process of taking history into the immersive world. So we'll kind of focus on that throughout.
Okay, so there was a great intro there, but just to give you a little more information if you haven't been, and if you haven't been, do go. So the Gunpowder Plot is a fully immersive experience, 360-degree environment in and on some really beautifully created tactile sets by Tim McQuillan-Wright, who will be joining us later. And the experience takes place within 25,000 square foot of the listed tower vaults at the Tower of London. It has a fully linear narrative, which is important to some stuff we'll talk about later, created by me, Rosie Jones, and written by the very brilliant Danny Robbins. And the audience is the protagonist. It has two possible endings, depending on what the audience choose in the interval. The audience are spies for the crown, and they're sent into the deep, dark underbelly of London in 1605. They move through 100 minutes of the experience in groups of 16 through 7 consecutive 10-minute spaces, with a new audience group entering each scene every 10 minutes. We have 3 VR scenes, 1 projection space, an ambisonic sound room, lots and lots and lots of other tech. Some really incredible scenes. You zip wire over the Thames in 1605. You meet Guy Fawkes, played by the very brilliant Tom Felton, and you help him move gunpowder down the river. You are hidden in priest holes in the wall of a house as priest hunters hunt you down. And we use layered reality's trademark approach, which is exactly what it says, layered reality. So in every scene you get tech, theatre, live actors, amazing set, sound design, smells, airflow, even temperature and water within the space, just to fully immerse the audience at every moment. And in case that's not enough for you, we also have 3 bars. So that's helpful. Great.
And so we were talking about which video to play, and this is just our favourite. So we're going to bear with us for a few minutes. And We'll leave it there. We were going to play it to the bit where she flirts with one of the actors, but it's
takes a little while, and also that's my face, very big, which I forgot about. Great. So, I'll leave it back in. This is, well, here we go. Might as well, we're all here. We opened to press and public on June the 9th last year, and we were really blown away and delighted with the reception. So here's us showing off a little bit. Pretty exciting set of reviews. But Tim also wanted to mention the audience reviews.
Yes, I think many of you will find that the press reviews don't necessarily shift tickets in the way it does for traditional theatre. So we're currently 4.5 on TripAdvisor and Google, which tends to make the difference. After a couple of preview weeks of not so high numbers, that they're back up now, and it's kind of consistently 4s and 5s. So, and we do find that word of mouth, that kind of peer-to-peer review is really effective, maybe more so than 5 stars. So, as we mentioned, it's presented as a partnership between Layered Reality and Historic Royal Palaces. So Historic Royal Palaces are a charity that runs the Tower of London, Hampton Court Palace, Kensington, etc. So very much a heritage organisation, but one that was very interested in connecting with audiences in new ways, in experimenting with kind of new technologies. Layered Reality are an entertainment business, and you'll know Somni and The War of the Worlds, their previous shows. So the kind of, in terms of that partnership, HRP brought the kind of location, which is obviously really key to selling tickets, the historical expertise and the kind of tourism brand, and Layered Reality brought their experience, which isn't that common of running this sort of thing, as well as their kind of tech and sponsorship and fundraising relations, which is quite a big thing. Yeah, I should have put this earlier, shouldn't I? So here is the brilliant creative. Actually, there was a segue which was saying, and Layered Reality brought a world-class creative team, which Historic Royal Palaces wouldn't have been able to bring in ourselves. So Hannah's already kind of run through these people, but it really was great set of people to be working with.
Yeah, we were extremely lucky to have so many people on who just really changed the experience for us. Did you want to talk about this, the ambitions here?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, simply, we wanted, what could this offer that you can't do in other ways from a history visit or a theatre visit? We wanted people to really believe that they had witnessed and stepped into a Jacobean world, had created memories of their experience within it. World-class theatre standards, and what we mean by that is the ability, one of the failings of kind of history and heritage, dramatised often is just the delivery of monologues, and actually we wanted the ability to have dialogues, to kind of create believable speech, believable kind of human interactions, and for characters to recur throughout the experience, so the audience was able to kind of build a emotional bond with them throughout.
Yeah, and we talk a little bit about that later, because that's actually very hard in our format. So that ambition to have repeated characters really changed how you feel about the history. So it was something that was quite tricky, and we'll talk about how our amazing stage management team managed that later on.
Great. So yeah, and to marry technical excellence with excellent storytelling, obviously it's easy just to do gimmicks and kind of scares and jumps and bangs, but the narrative has got to earn them, and there has to be a kind of imperative for them to happen within the story. Historical accuracy without compromising entertainment, and of course a commercially viable operation. This is it's funded by fundraisers, and that they want to return at some point. So the timeline, I think, is, you will all be familiar with how hard it is to get these things off the ground. And I think it's useful for me anyway in thinking about it in 3 different parts. So the first was establishing the partnership. So actually, HRP had something called the R&D studio, which was an in-house innovation lab, in effect. And we were able to host residencies in areas that we thought would be interesting to develop for new audiences, or kind of augmenting the kind of core visitor experience. And we hosted a Danish VR company called Macropole in to do a 2-week residency, and that enabled us to bring in like the trustees and the executive board, so they understood what this thing VR was and what it could do, and that it could create a type of experience that was completely new. So when it came to forming the partnership with Layered Reality, they were kind of quick and ready to say yes. So I think that kind of R&D process and kind of socializing these new technologies within the organization was really important. And I should give credit to Digital Catapult actually for making the introduction to layered reality as well. Then I think story selection, experience design. One of the things that most surprised me, we actually developed 3 possible story treatments. So one was around Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, one was the Gunpowder Plot, one was the Peasants' Revolt. We all would have put money on Anne Boleyn, right? Because that's like the history greatest hits. But it was much harder to find an immersive treatment of that story that had a kind of consistent audience route, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess that don't necessarily assume that your kind of greatest hits will transfer into immersive.
Yeah, it was interesting looking at Anne Boleyn because we all just assumed Anne Boleyn's so well known. There's such a like massive upswell of kind of input around like feminism and re-looking at history through a feminist lens. But it was so tricky to find a way to tell all parts of that story and give the audience a particular way into it, like a role. That it just we couldn't make it. I mean, we did a lot of work on it and we couldn't make it feel correct. And as soon as we found spying, which we'll talk about, that really unlocked the Gunpowder Plot for us.
And then the production bit at the end was relatively short and simple compared to all of that work and huge property negotiations, etc. But 5 years. It was a 5-year process from kind of deciding to do something in VR to opening the show. So not quick. So we'll talk now about some of the challenges and innovations. I don't think we need to read these, do we? Because we'll come through.
Yeah.
So the building itself, you know, you'll all know
Tim's
about.
having a flashback.
Yeah. So we'll start by introducing the bottom right character, which was a mummified rat, which was in the building when we arrived. Maybe still is. I don't know. This is the basement of a listed Victorian old warehouse. It's very damp. You cannot knock the walls down. It's listed. It's scheduled ancient monument, etc., etc. So it was a really, really challenging place to work. Well, you'll talk now about the way that impacted the show, but lots of site-specific stuff starts with a kind of black box, but this was another level because none of the walls could be used because it was listed. Even when we got the permissions and the kind of legal stuff sorted, was it 200 tons of concrete had to be removed? Yeah. There was once a dark ride in there, and they built this massive concrete plinth that ran it around that all had to go.
And there was a papier-mâché pig head that you took home, so I wouldn't want in my house. The building really actually almost became like another character, another element in the show as we were building this, because the particular shapes of the room really, really impacted the storytelling. And Tim had to do an enormous amount of spatial planning from the offset just to see how we could get what amount of scenes we could even get in there, how many rooms we could actually have that were feasible, how many did we want, and how many could we actually carve out of that space, and how was the flow going to work. One of the things that was a big challenge as well was that there's not really any circulation space. There's one kind of back corridor, but it's also passed through by audience, so it's also a live space. So that put like quite a lot of pressure on the story design, because how were we going to have an actor here and get him to there if we couldn't pass him through a live audience space? So yeah, that had a huge impact on that. And just even simple things like we wanted priest holes. We needed a certain amount to get our audience through. Where were we going to put them? How does that feature in the story? Where does that particular element of storytelling fit in the overall flow if it has to fit within our room schematic? So the building was, and it had its challenges.
And then, moving into the kind of more about the kind of historically specific stuff now. Obviously, for historic royal palaces, there's great sensitivity about the way this story was told. It is ultimately a story about religious terrorism, religious motivated terrorism. But it was very important that we found a way to tell that wasn't Catholics versus Protestants, and there was no implication of the organisation taking sides, because no one wants that, and there's too many contemporary parallels to that. And also the organisation has, what we wanted to do is not just tell that story that happened in 1605, but show how that had changed the world we live in today, because this is a bit of history that really has still got direct ramifications on the kind of way society and politics are ordered today.
Yeah, as Tim said, it was really, really imperative to us to show that there were huge rights and wrongs on both sides, and there really are. And the more you go into the history, the more you see like a really twisted bit of British history. So the first thing we sort of did while working with the historians was to really look at how we might use language. So we talk in the show about crown and barrel, or pro-plot and anti-plot. We don't really go, oh, the Catholics are doing this and the Protestants are doing that. And with that, because there's a huge extremity of belief within the Gunpowder Plot, and the characters that are most interesting, that made the plot happen, are the ones with extreme beliefs. But the Tower was very, very keen that we explore the idea of the moderates within the middle of it, the moderate Catholics and Protestants on both sides, and showing that they existed and showing how their impact on what happened in history was part of the overall storytelling. So like I said before, we tried to find a way in that was, obviously this is an experience. We wanted something that was fun, but we also wanted something that gave our audience an ability to be interrogative, to really ask questions themselves, to analyse. So once we did the research with the Tower and looked at how prevalent the spying network was at that time, that really gave us like a format to enter into this and try and give the audience a way to ask those questions. And then our key rule all the way through that everybody had, was on the wall, was always to come back to the central question of the experience, which is violence for a cause ever justified? So every scene we would try to just keep asking ourselves that question through the lens of what that particular scene was exploring. And then lastly, as Tim said, we were looking at this idea of what the contemporary resonances are. And there's quite a lot of thought around what would have happened had the plot gone either way. And we did look at exploring that, but it was extremely complicated. So we tried to do it through Guy and through who Guy is, because obviously in modern times we've had V for Vendetta and all of that, and a kind of rewriting of who Guy is and what he means. So we created a piece of VR at the end of the experience that explores what Guy is. And there's three things here of Tom. You've got Guy as the hero, Guy as the victim, the fall guy. He obviously got tortured and killed by the state, and Guy the terrorist. And it was really important to us to understand those three kind of modes and what they mean now and what they meant then, because he certainly is a very complex character.
There's also a specific challenge for the creative team in this, that was everyone knows the ending, which is quite tricky when you want to keep suspense up. And similarly to the use of the building, the kind of creative process didn't start with a kind of blank canvas either, because there were certain, obviously the investment for the show was based on a certain business model that required a certain number of people per group, a certain length of scenes, a certain number of scenes, a certain number of bars, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a whole lot of kind of criteria already in place before that kind of story could be mapped onto the space itself. And also we wanted to use Layered Reality's kind of trademark combination of different effects, theatre, kind of VR and atmospheric stuff. And we also needed it to be able to run long enough so it becomes more of a kind of attraction than a theatre show, as a kind of vehicle to be able to return that investment that was initially made.
Yeah, so when we started working within these parameters and also within the space, we started trying to sort of dramaturgically put the story together. So one of the first things we did was we really looked at the space and went around it in the dark before they had lights in there, and sort of worked out that just basically the low ceilings really lent themselves to that feeling of spying and conspiracy and darkness, dark times, witches, all of the superstitions that are present in Jacobean London. And then similarly, we then started looking at which bits of technology we were being asked to explore, and start to ask what is the best way to tell this part of the story, which then went literally hand in hand with what can this tech do that no other medium can do, which sounds really obvious, but once you start trying to put those three things into some kind of triangle, you start kind of understanding where you're placing certain things within the storytelling. One of the things that Tim and I spoke about very early on was that because of the low ceilings and the shapes of the spaces, that vistas, anything outdoors, wasn't really great. So within that space, so we looked at dark scenes and domestic scenes and real life scenes being more kind of anything kind of intimate and creepy being better live, and then anything with vistas or outdoor scenes or that we needed to kind of experience we would do in VR, which again is quite a basic VR kind of, obviously that can do that better, but once we kind of worked that out, it started giving us a framework. So and then we started going, well, okay, so the VR can do anything. Okay, we want to go down the river in 1605, great, and we do. You go down the river, you see Tom Felton in front of you, shot in volumetric, he looks great. You see the Thames, it's all lit up, there's a giant moon that we found out was a great bit of history, that there was a kind of super moon at that period, which is pretty amazing and quite scary. You feel the wind, you smell the stink off the river, but then we start going, well, what else we can do? What do we want to show? So we show Guy Fawkes's vision for the future in that bit. And you see this moment where he's really imagining what his future will be, and the boat rises up off the river and goes into this kind of vision of what would happen. And not just his vision for what he thinks the future should be like, but what he actually knows would happen when he blew up Parliament, which was going to be an enormous explosion that would kill a lot of people, a lot more than a lot of us imagine. So we visualized that as well. So it gave us, like, having those parameters and then expanding on them gave us a real way to say things that we wouldn't be able to say in any other format.
Brilliant. And then the authenticity, which is such a kind of important but difficult to define word. From the historical palaces side, they had done loads of research in the past about authenticity being a key part of audiences' trust. Like, they trust that the stuff that will be presented to them is based on evidence, is based on truth, that they're not being kind of misled, and that allows them, that kind of trust allows them to relax and enjoy the kind of experience of it. So we know that that's important. We also talked a lot about the kind of the movement from a traditional visitor experience to an immersive one. Is what the promise could be, that it's not just experiencing what it looked like, but what it felt like as well. So we talked a lot about a concept which is slightly clumsy, but like the authenticity of experience. So if you want people to feel those moments in time where the characters actually didn't know what was going to happen next, they felt peril and uncertainty, you sometimes have to recast the world to create the emotional feeling in a way that's accessible to our brains. Jacobean brains, early modern brains, they believed in religion, witchcraft, all of this kind of superstition stuff. They had fundamentally different kind of belief systems to us. So if we wanted our audiences now to feel the same as they did, sometimes you have to drop that strict authenticity, and you actually have to pull the experience and reframe it for contemporary audiences, because actually it's the emotion that you want to be authentic rather than the kind of strictly adhering to the facts. And obviously working with curators was really important throughout this. The timelines of historical research and theatrical production are very different, you'll be surprised to hear. So reconciling those was kind of crucial. So we identified up front the big bits of information that were going to be needed, like what did houses look like, what did the Thames look like, and the curators could kind of work on those in advance. We agreed a kind of weekly return, a kind of request and return for small questions like what did brooches and buckles look like, and swear words and all the rest of it. But we also agreed a statement of, what did we call it? A statement of authenticity, that actually became part of the contract, which went through all of the creative parameters, so music, costume, language, and kind of agreed on how much creative license could be applied to those, so that not every decision had to be checked back. The creative team could kind of get on with their job, because they knew that the music had to be inspired by period music, but it didn't have to be authentic at all.
Yeah, well, nobody wants to hear that. There's some very interesting Jacobean instruments that don't lend themselves to modern ears.
It's just bagpipes, isn't it?
Yeah, sounds like a goose. So we did, though, take the historical accuracy question like very seriously. But if you have been, you'll know it's not entirely historically accurate. So we started with like I said, dramaturgically, we started with the key facts. And usually you have a script. I'm from a theatre background, so normally you start on the script or you develop the script and that's like your Bible. But with this, we had to kind of make a script. So we started trying to go back to history every time we got in that position where we were like, what on earth are we doing? And we'll talk about that in a bit because it got us out of some really interesting problems. But making this, as Tim said, you've got a modern audience and they have some really key expectations. And like with any famous IP, they also have like a feeling of what are the big hitter scenes, what do I want to be in? And our British audiences would want to be with Guy Fawkes when he was arrested. They probably want to see the gunpowder being sourced, probably want to be involved in plotting. Then we have our tourist audiences, because we're with the tower. That means we have to provide an extreme amount of clarity. And then because also with the tower connection, we're expecting audience groups, which we do get, who are much more familiar with historical expectations. So Guy Fawkes' lantern, the Monteagle letter, the more recent conspiracy theories. So we had to kind of work those kind of back in as well. So we really did feel the weight of this kind of expected history, and then where the real history and the expected history diverge. Because, for example, contemporary descriptions of Guy Fawkes' arrest, we were really excited, got hold of one, got sent it. Literally, some bloke goes, opens the right door a minute and is like, oh, what are you doing? I'm going to arrest you. But that's it. It's not exciting. But having worked closely with the historians, they sent us some contemporary descriptions of where the plotters were arrested at Holbeck House. And that is very dramatic. There's a big gun siege. There's like somebody tries to dry out some gunpowder by a fire and it explodes. It's pretty epic. So with working closely with the historians, we combined those two scenes to try to make something a bit more exciting, so that our audience had that exciting Indiana Jones arrest of Guy Fawkes scene, but it still had some historical basis. So that was part of that. I mean, the other thing that telling these stories from a kind of more modern perspective is that the whole of the Gunpowder Plot is just about men. There are some contemporary stories about some, like I said, Anne Vaux, who was a recusant who was very involved. So we started to look at how we might be able to feminize the story or bring in women's stories, and how that might work across the story as a whole. So we do have a plotter who we've based on Anne, and we have made Cecil, Lady Cecil, so we have that, and we have a guy called Thomas, who was our main character, and he's kind of a mashup between two characters, because the guy that arrested Guy Fawkes, called Thomas Knivet, he was kind of not much info about him, but we found a very exciting spy, also called Thomas Philippes, and so we kind of combined them. So the historians really did give us a lot of that basis for how we were going to actually get into the meat of the story, and it was it was pretty exciting when they came up with something and we were all like, yes, a spy called Thomas. We were able to kind of pull those together.
The ultimate get out of jail card is we have what we call the history of the truth, history of corridor of truth at the end, which basically kind of corrects all of those stories. So we don't want to be accused of false history. So we do make those corrections at the end, which people love actually, because a lot of the things that they imagine are most fanciful turn out to be true, because history is always weirder than the actual truth.
So we've got some lovely pictures here. You can see on the left there, the actual cell where Guy Fawkes was held, and there is our set there that Tim brilliantly made. Love showing that picture. Here we have some of the graffiti that is carved into the walls of the tower, the real graffiti, and there's our version. So you can see that we did base a lot of everything in the experience very much on the historical accuracy.
Yeah, so obviously, key part of immersive stuff is the audience needs to know who they are, what they can do, what their role is in the world, and that needs to be consistent throughout. So as Hannah's already said, we've cast our audience as Catholic prisoners who are released from the Tower of London on condition that they spy for the state. But you really have to work hard at them knowing this. So they're told they're Catholics 12 times in the first 15 minutes, and even then sometimes it doesn't quite sink in.
So just to quickly talk a little bit about immersion and agency within it. This is done obviously a lot within the parameters of the history, but also within literally the stage and the set design and the story design. So in the first scene, aside from just saying you're Catholic, you're Catholic, you're Catholic, the audience is sort of taught how to behave in our experience, because audience have different expectations of what immersion means. I'm sure you've all come across this. And so we try to kind of lower them into what we expect from them. So Tim designed us a very brilliant space with kind of 3 aspects. It's a kind of, you go first into a dungeon, you're very immersed in that. Then there's a kind of corridor you run through within the back of the tower, and then there's a kind of holding space. And this has got 3 bits of story in it. And the first thing that happens is the audience meet one character that's speaking directly to them. And this is their first immersive experience, and it teaches them about direct address. Then we have a scene between 2 characters, and a third comes in. And this teaches them that there will be full scenes and stuff they have to listen to. And then they are alone for a few seconds, which starts to teach them agency. Sometimes you wonder what they do in that few seconds, see quite strange things. And then we have a last bit where they get pulled out by a character and run down a series of areas, which teaches them that element that we are going to expect you to run and take part in this story directly. So by the end of that first scene, we have lowered them, hopefully, into an idea of what the immersion is going to be like within the experience as a whole. And then lastly, we have one big ask in the centre of the show, which we build to throughout the show, and which changes the second half, where we ask them to make a decision about do they support the crown or the state, or the plotters.
So as I mentioned, we really wanted people to be able to be dialogue between multiple characters, and for characters to recur throughout it. Now, obviously, it's groups of 16 entering every 10 minutes. If you had a full cast for each of those groups, it would be completely commercially unviable. So working out a kind of show running system that allowed the actors to circulate to multiple groups and actually be different characters for different groups, but also that to coordinate with what is in effect 7 different mini programmed cinemas, theatres that are running according to show control with all the effects and audios, visuals, etc. And so,
I'll just do this quickly. Well, you can play it. This is we'll just play it while I'm talking. But this is our stage management's timings for actors and audience groups. We have several programs that are custom designed for the show. We have a show control system or hidden buttons in the space. Actors trigger these to tell the control room if they're ready, and then all of the audience is bunny hop to the next space at the same time. And this is our thing to show the actors where they need to be at any point in the show. Because the entire show runs on rails, there is no live stage management once the go is pressed. It means everything can run all together. And that was, I love that. I don't know if anyone else finds it exciting, but I just think it's a genius bit of how we work out where anyone is at any given point. Okay. So should we just quickly talk about the thing about going over the river, and then I'll shut up after that.
So this kind of close relationship between the creative team and curators, there was a lot of nervousness around it. Obviously, both sides are worried that it's going to push them out of their professional comfort zone. But what we found actually is that sometimes it was able to offer narrative solutions to problems that had arisen.
Yeah, we had a moment where we were getting really stuck. We needed to physically, within the storytelling, move the audiences from one location to another. We needed them to cross the river. We needed some more earning the trust of the plotters, like why are they trusting at this point? It was all getting quite kind of sticky. It didn't feel like it was quite running. And then somebody, I think it was Alden, told us about this story where it was an actual rescue from the tower, where a priest literally zip-wired out of the tower. I say that like it sounds insane, but they strung a rope out to like a tree outside, and he put a sheet over it, and he went down it. And we were like, okay, zip-wire out of the tower, boom, done. Like, why would we not do that? So we made ours a little bit longer. You're on it for quite a while. You go all the way out over the Thames in our version. But it is based in fact, and nobody ever, when they get to the corridor of truth, and they're like, no way. That is not. We're like, yep, that is based on fact. Yeah.
Father Gerard, a real character. So here are some. That's the kind of previs of the river, and that's the kind of final pixel. So takeaways. organisations need to be ready for partnership. I think that things need to move at paces whereby a lot of the internal decisions need to be made kind of in advance. And it's great when you do press go to have set down those red lines in advance, to kind of have made those, reach those agreements about kind of creative limits. And yeah, the point I said earlier about don't assume your greatest hits will translate into immersive, although we could do a Henry VIII if we wanted, I'm sure we could, yeah.
Yeah, just as we were saying, treat history as your script, keep going back to that because it's got hidden gems all over it. Lean into the format and the restrictions. Once we sort of did that, we found opportunity. Don't expect it to be business as usual for anyone, but again, that gave us a lot of opportunity that we didn't see coming. And I've got to enjoy the ride there, which is...
Yeah, did you?
Really? I like zip wiring over the...
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name's Alex. I'm from Catapult. Thank you both so much, and three of you now. I'm sure there's so much more you could tell us about creating this experience, but yeah, limited time. So I guess my question is, what access offerings do you provide for guests with disabilities?
So the whole show flow is wheelchair accessible. So there is 2 Jacobean lifts. No, there's 2 lifts. So that was kind of important because a lot of shows are wheelchair accessible. But you have to kind of double back and all the rest of it. In terms of, to be perfectly honest, I'm not quite sure where they are with this. The plan was, rather than to try and kind of work out BSL and kind of audio described versions, is to work with groups of people when it's open to kind of develop those.
They have particular days that are accessible, so people can book onto those, and some of them are open performances and some of them are BSL, and they have different needs and they're bookable on the website.
The one challenge that we were talking about that is very difficult is kind of relaxed performances, because it's a very intense experience, and commercially very difficult to reprogram a show every time you run it. So I think that was a real challenge that we probably didn't solve.
They have a program version that they turn it to a different level. But we don't get a lot of take up of people booking it. I think because of the nature of all what you can see it's like, there isn't a great take up, but it is there.
Hiya. I know you guys mentioned that you were in partnership with a lot of different organisations, but I was just primarily curious about what kind of budget you guys were working with.
Are you allowed to say that?
If you're not allowed, that's more than fine.
I don't think we are, to be honest.
Or if you could ask what point of the production took up the most amount of money or planning.
The building took a lot. The kind of getting the building in a kind of state that was ready for modern audiences. Obviously the VR.
Yeah, the VR. Yeah. And
then the sort of systems integrations is another massive part.
Yeah, the planning. Of course, quite a lot of money, I would have thought.
Yeah. In terms of where the money came from, like I said, it's investor funded by Layered Reality, so that was the kind of source of income, and then there was kind of in-kind support from historical palaces with location and curatorial input and things like that.
There are 3
kind
pieces
of
of VR.
Data audience sharing,
yeah.
And
they were punchy. There's 3 pieces of VR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they were surely the single most single biggest expense.
Yeah, in terms of the creative, yeah, definitely.
I think the VR is almost the predicted area of where the money goes, and it's always the venue which eats way more than you think it's ever going to, and that's even before you started. Just making it safe. You saw it was. I found that photo a little bit triggering. I'll be honest with you, but I think is that me? I think a lot of the problems come with the assumptions that you have over what the venue will allow you to do. And we obviously had an awful lot of information that we were given about essentially you can drill into this, but you can't paint it, or you can paint this, but you can't drill into it. And then there's this other category of you can't do anything with it, and you can't even let people look at it. You've got to turn them away. And we had that sort of come in halfway through the process when we found out, you can't even let people go anywhere near the walls because they might want to touch them. And so we had it was a shifting set of obstacles that we were dealing with that all came into the activation of the space, really. That sense of, we all walked into the space originally and thought, these were amazing vaults, just brilliant, brilliant walls, amazing ceilings. And you think, okay, well, we'll use all of that and we'll just build up the floors so we can get all the services under the floors, and that's great. And then we find out, no, we're not allowed to actually use any of the walls because people can look at them and that scares walls. So we ended up losing the floors, building fake walls in front of these beautiful walls. And it all it all just sort of eats out of, initially eats out of the activation, then it just eats out of the set budget. And you find out you've done nothing but replicate one giant space, made it slightly smaller, but looks exactly the same.
But really beautiful.
But you can drill into it, so it's
Yeah.
And you can hide speakers in it and stuff. It's great.
So just as a question from one of the persons supposed to be giving the thing to the Christians, anyway. Just as far as the return for the likes of historical palaces, do you find that, I've just been to another destination and they had something that was very basic. Do you feel like historical palaces got the return on investment that they wanted from doing something as excessive as this?
Does anyone ever? So I think it is a long game. That's the thing. So it's been open 18 months now, but we always knew that it's going to take about 5 years before things really become profitable. So and we that was clear from the start. So that was a core part. So the very early discussions were about taking over a kind of venue that was kind of more inside the tower or what have you, but actually you can't get spaces for anything like that duration. So that was why this venue was really important, because it was available for that duration after 6 different property leases were aligned and lots of lawyers were paid.
Hi guys, I'm Martin, I work in immersive learning. So sometimes we find that clients have overly prescriptive learning outcomes that they want to achieve from experience that can then get in the way of your jobs to actually create something. Is that a challenge you had to overcome in this instance?
Actually, I wouldn't say so. They wanted us to make sure that there was certain things that we covered, obviously, that we made sure it was clear what was and what wasn't kind of real about it. There was an enormous, like I said, a lot of pressure on ensuring that we were being very respectful around the kind of two sides of the question, but actually it was quite supportive in terms of how we built the story. I'm working on another project at the minute, which has got some more museum-based typology, and it's interesting working with those curators versus the curators that we had on Gunpowder, because it was a very different approach. I think because the lens that we were working through was very much like, make this an exciting story to be inside of, rather than learn this particular thing. But there was things that they wanted us to include, like the size of the blast zone, for example, which would have been 1 kilometre, which does really change your idea of the Gunpowder Plot. But that was quite helpful, because that was quite a key moment in our storytelling. I don't know what you think.
Well, yeah, you're probably being quite kind. It's important. I would say this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's important to have a kind of producer that's the buffer between those different departments. It's like, I always think your kind of job as a producer is translating between the kind of professional languages and objectives of different people. Because I think and actually organisations are no more than a series of people and personalities, right? So it just depends who you stick in a room together half the time.
Yeah, actually, there was a couple of moments that were a bit more sticky, weren't there? Like a couple. Yeah, but just where we had like moments we were like, I don't know how we're going to get that in, like literally. But like also there was a lot that really opened stuff up for us, so it was a kind of bit both, I guess.
Yeah, it was like just stick it in the corridor of truth. That's the end.
Yeah, I think Tim though would probably there was some stuff where they were like, at the beginning there was very much stuff about what the floor has to be this colour or.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I think at the beginning, because I mean, I remember coming in when we were still talking about the Anne Boleyn story.
Yeah.
And so the sort of adapting to change is sort of what we do anyway. And it was a really nice phrase, I don't know whose phrase it was, but about embracing the restrictions. And you go, that is what we are used to doing. And quite often that can bring out, our best work. I think it's when you're told the parameters are one thing and then they change into another thing, that's when it all starts to unravel. But the idea of being given the so-called impossible brief, I mean, we both come from theatre backgrounds, and that's when I get most excited, when, a director or producer comes to you and says, I have no idea how we're going to do this. And go, good. Because you would try and do this without me if you could. So that's great. I wasn't too traumatized by it because it came quite near the beginning, I think. And maybe that's key. And they'd all settled down, and I think you started taking the flak after a while.
Yeah. I think one thing that I felt was really...
Swearing. You could say that, about the swearing.
No, you can say the swearing.
Oh.
Was when you kind of... Because the default for like a heritage organisation is to make the entire room look accurate. But the reality of like theatre budgets is actually you just make one corner look good and then direct the eyeballs there through action, right? So once you sort of focus on that, like that, you don't want people to look up because the lighting will discourage it and all the rest of it. It's like you make those details that will be focused on accurate.
There's certainly, I think, this sort of linear immersive stuff. We'll do some sort of free roam immersive, which is just a very different way of approaching the show. But this linear stuff, you can guide the focus of the audience in the same way that we used to with theatre, and ultimately get away with quite a lot. There's a lot of kit that is needed in these shows, and you can't stick stuff in front of the kit because otherwise it doesn't work. So using the dynamism and the excellence of the actors to keep the audience held. There might be some who walk into a space and take a nanosecond to take in every anomaly, which is irritating. But most of the time, you can get away with focusing on certain areas and then rushing people out the next side.
But Hannah wants to tell you her favourite Jacobean swear words now.
There was a chat at the beginning about whether or not we would use historical phrasing. I was very much against this, just thinking of how we were going to write it to sound sort of Shakespearean or something. But then we started to try to use specific bits of phrasing. We obviously don't say things like okay, because it's just not accurate. But one of the curators did us a lovely 4-page essay on swearing, and then the recommendation at the end was that all of our actors should say to the other actors when they want to swear at them, a turd in your teeth and a turd in your little wife's teeth too. So we said, no, we're really sorry. I'm glad that's historically accurate, but if anybody says that in the production, we might all never want to go back. So yeah.
But that's a great example. Like early modern English is not authentic. People think it's weird, and it pulls people out of an experience completely. So you have to pull the language into the present, otherwise it kind of really breaks that.
Yeah, and Tim mentioned the actors there. We haven't talked that much about them because we're talking about how we got to this point, but our actors are brilliant, and they take so much flack, and they're so focused and excellent, and they really they're a huge part of why people buy it, why people go in there, because it's got this amazing person talking directly into your face. It really and they really are brilliant.
Is there I feel we've spoken a lot, Tim. Is there anything you want to add based on the talk that you feel that we have we
Is it weird to say no? I'm quite happy. No, I think the thing with the building, I think it's always, we were told there were certain elements with the building. You go away and you design it, and then, the script was an ever-evolving thing, which is always a challenge. And we used to devise theatre as well, but we're not used to devise theatre which has massive scenic set pieces. And I think the biggest, maybe, oh God, who knows? You ask me in the bar later what the biggest challenge is, I'll have a different answer, probably. But the biggest challenge that I have at the moment is that when any department changes any of their work, it always impacts the set. Not a single piece of cabling can be moved without creating work and essentially destroying some budget from the set. And I think sort of trying to navigate that, and when it is devised, it's impossible to be that many steps ahead. And I don't know whether as the genre, whatever sort of huge thing that the genre of immersive experience is, as it starts to find more sort of single pathways rather than this sort of massive go anywhere. It might be that we find ways to streamline that process so that we can stop those changes a little bit, but I just think it's sort of par for the course, really. And I think it's just unfortunate that, yeah, it always affects the set, because the set is hiding everything. Yeah, that's the biggest challenge. And the venue, always the venue. Always the venue is the biggest challenge. Yeah.